sanctuary at last for Afghan heroes, local translators who served alongside British troops win the right to come to Britain after years of uncertainty. Dozens of Afghan interpreters who served with British troops will be given sanctuary in the UK after a campaign by the Mail. Defense Secretary Gavin Williamson last night tore up a failed policy that meant brave translators were abandoned to the Taliban. Around 50 who served on the front line in Helmand alongside UK soldiers will now be granted visas to Britain under new qualifying measures. They will also be able to bring their wives and children, taking the figure to an estimated 200. The decision is a huge victory for the Mail's 3-year betrayal of the Brave campaign, which revealed how interpreters left behind in Afghanistan were shot at, issued with death threats and even executed on their doorsteps. Mr. Williamson said a review of the government's existing relocation scheme would honor the extraordinary service of those who risked their lives to serve with our armed forces. Writing in the Mail today, he said, "Frontline patrol interpreters were the unsung heroes of the military campaign in Afghanistan. They served our nation with dazzling distinction. Standing shoulder to shoulder with our troops on the battlefield, they demonstrated unflinching courage in carrying out duties that were fraught with great difficulty and danger. And we will do what is right to honor their extraordinary service." He added, "That is why after reviewing the scheme we are bringing forward plans to make it fairer and to make sure we deliver for those who were at greatest risk for the longest periods." Under the current relocation scheme, interpreters had to be serving on an arbitrary date in December 2012 to qualify. They also had to have served in Helmand, the scene of some of the fiercest fighting, for at least a year. So far, several hundred former translators have started new lives here, but the policy has also excluded those who worked with British troops during some of the worst fighting in Helmand in the years before 2012. Mr. Williamson will widen the qualifying period to include those who spent at least a year with British forces as far back as 2006 to allow those interpreters who put their lives on the line during those difficult years in Helmand to be able to move to the UK. He admitted the existing policy failed to take account of the immense sacrifice and service of many who had left before that time, 2012. The qualifying period for the relocation policy now extends back to May 1, 2006, the day British forces assumed responsibility for Helmand. Those deemed eligible to come to the UK will be granted a 5-year visa. They will then have to apply for indefinite leave to remain, but the £2,389 application fee will be waived. Mr. Williamson will also review cases in which interpreters were not made redundant but served on the front line under short-term contracts or were forced to quit because of death threats. A former Afghan interpreter for the SAS who was hunted relentlessly by the Taliban is among those whose cases will now be reviewed. Abdul, who worked on the front line for nearly 5 years, was forced to hide in the shadows after the property where he was staying was sprayed with bullets as part of a terrifying campaign of intimidation. Speaking from his hiding place in Kabul last night, he said, "This is very good news and I pray that I will be included with my wife and children. We have been hiding from the Taliban for too long." The 35-year-old father of 4 is desperate to be reunited with his brother, who was also a translator and has been granted sanctuary in Britain. Abdul began working for UK forces in 2007 but stopped in June 2012 when his contract ended and he did not try to renew it because of death threats. Because he stopped working before the December 2012 qualification date, he was not entitled to come to Britain under the UK's relocation scheme. Up to 70 Afghan interpreters are thought to be affected in this way. The relocation policy was one of 2 under which those who served for the UK Armed Forces during the 13-year war could be given sanctuary. A second measure, known as an intimidation scheme, forced interpreters to prove they were threatened by the Taliban. However, a scathing report by the Commons Defence Select Committee last month found that not a single interpreter had been allowed to the UK under the scheme. A Daily Mail-backed petition over the treatment of translators was signed by more than 178,000 people, including former